Okay, everybody, welcome to the Poison Pen Bookstore. My name is Patrick Milliken, and it's a real treat and an honor to have Michael Koryta here talking about his new book, terrific new book, If She Wakes. And we have a special treat with Nick Petrie here, who's going to be interviewing Michael tonight. I'm sure you'll be talking about, you have a new book coming out in January.
I do.
And I'm sure you guys will be talking about that too. So I'm going to hand it over and have a nice little evening out tonight. So there you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having us. Thanks to Michael for coming out, and looking forward to this conversation. I really enjoyed this book, If She Wakes. It was such a blast to read, and it takes on quite a bit of velocity, which is always something that I enjoy. Where did this one come from? So what was the starting point for this?
Have you read something I've written about the book by any chance? Or was that, did you just throw out the word velocity?
No, that's a word I know.
Excellent. Okay. So, that's a beautiful open because, where it came from. Sometimes I'll have quotes or phrases, certain ideas that I write, kind of keep on the desk as a reminder of, okay, here are the guardrails you want to stand. This book I wrote, I had one word on my desk, and it was velocity, because I just did not want the pace to flag, but I also, creatively, I just written a book called How It Happened that was a slower burn, more emotional, and much more personal to me story, and I needed the creative break of just kind of letting one run. So, velocity is exactly where it came from. I'm glad you felt it. That was the goal.
Yeah, that's to me, that's what I love about thrillers, is that you get caught up and it gets your pulse going. It has a physical effect. So how did you end up starting with? So it's not a spoiler to say that this is a book in part about locked-in symptoms. So how is that something you read, something you heard, a friend of yours?
All of the above. So a friend of mine gave me a book called. Actually, he didn't give me the book. I had to buy it myself. I give him credit for giving me this book, but he didn't hand it over. It was called Into the Gray Zone by, the writer's name is Adrian Owen, and he does research. He's a neuroscientist researching locked-in syndrome, which is, does everyone know what the condition is? Okay, so it's when to the doctors and family members, the patient would appear to be in a totally vegetative state, but the patient is actually fully aware and alert. And I read this book, and it hit me on lots of different levels. The first one is the obvious emotional just dread and terror that it conjures up, and then that promptly makes me think, as a writer, I go, wow, there's something here. I can definitely have fun with that. And there was one test in particular where it's in the book, but it's a very real test. They will show a patient in an MRI a clip from a short Hitchcock film. I think it was actually Alfred Hitchcock Presents, one of the TV shows. And the sequence is a kid has a loaded gun, and the audience knows that the gun is loaded, but the characters do not. And so they would play this video in front of a vegetative patient, and the MRI would show in many circumstances an ability to both follow the plot, but then an emotional recognition, a sense of suspense and fear. And I found that the whole idea of the test fascinating, and so away I went.
So you had a book where the primary driver was the idea of velocity, and the main character was in a vegetative state.
You're noticing it. Very, very shrewd. So I came up with the idea of the vegetative character before I wrote down the word velocity.
Okay.
Because I realized that was going to be.
Oh, so velocity was the solution to the inherent
It was the
problem.
solution.
Okay.
So and Enter Abbey then. So there's a character. There are, I think, 4 point of view characters outside of the world of the hospital, and I wanted to put Tara, who is the coma patient, in a situation where she could motivate and direct and redirect the action, while never being able to really do anything physically. And I reached a point where I'm trying to drive everyone through. I mean, it's a MacGuffin, but then I realized it ultimately doesn't matter if you think someone knows something that threatens your life, you will respond to that. And so this is a scenario I had started the book with, and then as I got farther and farther along, I was thinking, I don't really need to ever say what this is, and I was so tempted to never answer, I guess, the mystery, because to me the story had played out like a thriller, and the content of the secret of the first chapter does not really need to be answered to allow for any character's movement, good or bad guy,
and resolution.
And resolution. Yeah. So I was tempted to do that, but then I thought at least 9 of you might attack me. I ran it by my editor, and he's just warped enough that he liked the idea. But it might have been one of those things where it's like, your kid tells you, I think we should live on Mars. And you're like, yeah, that would be interesting, but let's not today. So maybe that was Josh's actual response to it. Sure, don't give the secret up.
So do you guys know what a MacGuffin is? Are you familiar with the term? It's a Hitchcock term?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
So it's and correct me if I get this wrong, but my understanding is it's a device that a writer uses to pull the reader through the story, like the Maltese Falcon, right? So we don't, I mean, that was sort of the classic. We don't really know what it is, or and there are, if you start reading thinking, is there a MacGuffin, you will find one, probably more often than not, that there is some device that they're using to pull through. But that's something I think about all the time.
And I had never put one in before, so this is book number 14, and
your first MacGuffin.
Finally, exactly. I'm MacGuffined, and it was satisfying after all these years.
There you go. Well, maybe you'll use it again. Well, so one of the things that I like about your work is, and about crime fiction in general, is that there's often that something that maybe there's a better word for this, but it's kind of an aboutness about crime fiction, where so you're diving into locked-in syndrome. There's this piece on why not to run a generator indoors. Pro tip for anybody out there. And there's this great bit on driving and stunt driving. So what kind of research did you do for that? Did you get to go do a driving course, or you lead foot yourself?
I wanted to do one of the amazing driving courses, and there are some great schools, and I researched all of them. And unfortunately, I was behind deadline, so it really wasn't panning out. I needed to just kind of make this crap up and figure it out. Fortunately, I do have a background of elite driving achievements. Within, I think, 3 weeks of getting my license, I spun my mother's Oldsmobile Cutlass off a double S curve and managed to shoot it directly between 2 trees and in someone's backyard.
Nice.
And the woman who emerged from the home was less impressed. However, when the police arrived, the officer was actually said, "Wow, that could have been really bad if you hit a tree," but I had not. So, with that sort of start, I was bound to understand the rhythms of a great.
This book is inevitable.
Exactly. I clearly have a very good handle on this. Like Tom Cruise, you do your own stunts. Maybe it doesn't work out.
Right.
You break your ankle. You wreck your mom's Oldsmobile. Things happen.
So what's the most fun? I mean, you are somebody who has a reputation as someone who really enjoys research and diving into the real world. So what's the most fun you've had doing research? What's the weirdest thing you've done? What's the most interesting thing you've done?
First of all, anyone who has the reputation for really diving into research is what's known as a bullshitter. Because that's what you tell your editor you're doing when you're actually not writing. So I'm glad that I've built that reputation. I think I've earned that. But I do. I was a reporter and I was a PI, and I missed the field work of it, and showing up in a bizarre world that you know nothing about, and talking to someone who this is their entire life. So I wrote a book called The Ridge that was about a big cat rescue center, and then I ended up going on cat rescues, and I've been on 14, I think now.
You're still doing it.
Yeah, that's an example of how research kind of carries over, but it's fairly weird, I think. Those Who Wish Me Dead was basically born out of a backpacking trip in the Beartooth Mountains. Last words, I had the bad idea to try caving. Cavers are the best and the worst because they all want to help you out, but when they help you out, they take you underground every time. So the helpful caver is a really it's a dangerous situation. But the strangest thing I've done, I don't know, probably I would imagine if you've ever been in a cage with a sedated lion and have to put your sweatshirt over his head because he's beginning to wake up, that's probably up there on the list.
That would be up there on my list. Yeah. So, your first books were you wrote a 4-book series with a PI protagonist. Then you wrote 2 books featuring Marcus Novak, but really you've done a lot more standalones than anything else. So do you think that there's something that with series fiction, there's always something that sort of pulls through, right? There are common threads. Obviously there are characters that follow through, but there are really themes that follow through. Is there something in your standalones that kind of ties those together, do you think?
I think there's something in the whole body of work that ties it together, and I think most writers probably feel this way. When you look back, you see that you come back to different territory, and it's one of the reasons I probably gravitate towards standalones, beyond just an attention deficit problem. I think I want the chance to address the same thematic territory without seeming repetitive. So survival narratives, I'm very clearly drawn to those. I've done that, and Those Who Wish Me Dead, it's kind of like a straight ahead. It's more honest about what it is, but If She Wakes is very much a survival story.
Two threads of a survival narrative.
Exactly. So I'm big into redemption narratives. Anytime, whether it's a series book or a standalone, I'm gonna have the past will be driving the present. That's the one thing and it's not a goal. I don't sit down and say, oh, where is the past in this book? It's just that over time, what has emerged, and I realize that there are going to be certain things that continue to drive my work. I think even people who write long-term series, you can feel the interests of James Lee Burke and Michael Connelly, across time. I was always a little bit leery of being bound in by place, I think, and so your choice to me is brilliant because you can move a character around in a way that I can get to know the character, I can follow him, and have an intimate understanding of his backstory, but as a writer, you're not trapped in, it's Milwaukee, this book will be set in the winter in Milwaukee, the next one it will be spring.
Right.
You can take him into so many different places.
Well, that's my great fear as a writer is sort of, we all have writers who we admire where, we can see a period where, this is not their best, there's a down spot here, right? So, I live in fear of that, and I don't know if you know when you're in it or not.
I've written 14 books in the down spot now,
and it's working out for you.
I'm hanging in there. It's not that bad. It's lonely, but
that's. I was I was very conscious of not wanting to get stuck doing something. And when you start a series, and if it begins to gain traction, the publishers, they are really looking to see that series continue. And there's a point at which where some writers are, they're done with the series, but their publisher's not done with the series. And so I wanted to give myself lots of
Some writers who are done from this mortal coil, and their publishers are not done with that.
Yes. So I think that's a challenge that all especially crime writers face, because we are kind of dealing with some of those same themes over and over again.
I don't think that's unique to crime, though. I mean, Cormac McCarthy has some central obsessions. Toni Morrison. So I don't think it's unique to crime. It's the idea, and to me, the whole point is not to be trying to steer away from the things that you love, the things that fascinate you, but find a way to continue to discuss those in what feels narratively fresh for you, the writer. Ideally, I believe that anytime it feels fresh for the writer, it's going to be working for the reader. And the reader is so much smarter in terms of if I'm phoning in a book, you guys are going to notice immediately. So you can't. The idea that you can fool the audience about where your heart is, I think, is completely wrong. And for me, trying to stick with a series for 15 books, you guys would have smelled that out in book 6.
Well, it's just not who you
Wouldn't
are.
be it.
Yeah, it's just not your DNA. So I was interested in. You're 14 books in, but the story of your first book, how that came to be, is pretty interesting. Not just the book, but sort of some of the things that you did to sort of prepare yourself to write that book. So can you take us back to Michael Koryta at 16, 14? Talk us through to you being an Edgar nominee and winning the St. Martin's Book Prize at 21.
I had
By the
a
way.
fear of working for a living, so I wanted to avoid that. I always knew this is what I wanted to do, and I'm only half joking, I guess, when I say I have fear of working for a living. I wanted any job that I had to be something that would be experience for becoming a novelist. And I decided when I was 16, my high school had an independent study program, and so I started to intern with a private investigator, and then I was also doing an internship of sorts with at that point he was retired, but a sports editor at the local newspaper, who was a fantastic writer, nationally renowned writer. And those turned into part-time jobs, turned into kind of full-time jobs, but it was always, I was always writing. I was, in terms of working on a book, I knew that I wanted to do that. And I don't know why I didn't feel like I had to put in 20 years of experience on a riverboat before I was allowed to write about the riverboat. I was always writing, and it's an interesting question to look back on now, because one thing that stands out to me that I probably wouldn't have mentioned 10 years ago if you'd asked this. I realize now how private the act of writing was to me. So Tonight I Said Goodbye, when that was accepted for publication, my best friend and roommate had no idea that I telling him hey, they're going to publish my books. You wrote a book? Even my parents, they knew I wanted to be a writer, but the level of seriousness that I brought to it at that point was very personal, and I think part of that was the knowledge that it seemed ridiculous to be 19 years old and saying I'm writing a novel, in between classes, and then I'm going to go mow the neighbor's lawn, make a little spending money, and then I'm going to go write a novel. That's when you're doing it I think now looking back, I realize that had I been more open about those ambitions, it would have also created a situation where how ludicrous the idea was might have been driven home, and then that's a block. That's something that
Right.
I didn't
Right.
need.
No, sometimes you have to sort of hold it close, and it's a weird thing to want to do. It's a weird. I mean, not just to want to do it, but it's a weird thing to do. And I wrote for 25 years, and when you're in college and you want to be a writer, that's kind of cool. And you go to graduate school at 30 and you want to be a writer, that's kind of cool. But when you're 45 and you're no longer a building contractor and you become a home inspector, it's a little weird that you're still doing it. And so the number of people that I knew who knew that I was writing got smaller and smaller and smaller. And so suddenly, my first book, The Drifter, gets accepted for publication, and people are, it's the same, you're like, you do what?
Yeah.
Huh? And real estate agents who know me as the guy who tells you what's wrong with your basement. Like there's a piece in the newspaper, and they're like, who the hell are you? It's a strange thing.
That's why it took him 3 weeks to get that report about the crawl space.
That was a much more interesting thing. So your parents didn't know you were submitting to agents, to?
No, they knew that I wanted to write books. They might have known that I said I was writing a book, but I didn't share pages. There were like 2 people on the planet who knew that I was actually working that seriously at it. One was Bob Hamill, who was the newspaper mentor that I mentioned, and then there was one person, I guess. There were a few other people who knew that I actually was, that I was writing, but how the details of that it was a PI novel, that it was set in Cleveland,
Right. Right.
Even like those kind of big ideas. That was me and my characters.
That's kind of a beautiful thing, though, and that it's not.
It was the most fun it ever was.
Yeah, because there's nobody waiting. There's no expectation. It's just you and the story.
And so the popular sort of myth about me is that I sold my first book, and in reality, Tonight I Say Goodbye was my 4th, and it's the second Lincoln Perry book. So I wrote Tonight I Say Goodbye actually knowing that there was an editor out there in the world who would read it, because by then St. Martin's had read, considered, and rejected the first Lincoln Perry book. So Tonight I Say Goodbye is actually a sequel to me.
Oh, well, that makes me feel better because I had 3 books that couldn't get published either.
There you go.
All right. Which is also really a common story, right? I mean, I think we all know people that it's rare where I got to do this with a woman named Samantha Downing at my home bookstore in Milwaukee, and it was her 12th book that finally got published. I think that's.
Could you have done that? Would you have kept going?
Well, I'm a much slower writer, so each book took me, 4 to 5 years to write. So I would be dead. No, I could not do that. No.
Yeah, you just got a timeout.
Yeah.
It seems so daunting, the idea of having 12 unpublished books before you broke through, but then it also was, I think it was the most pure fun writing ever was for me, was when I didn't know that there would be an audience. You just kind of hoped that there would be one.
Right.
Because then you're not thinking, there's no weight of expectation or pressure.
Well, and you're creating it all. It's all so new, right? And there's no expectation that you actually know what you're doing, so that you have this. It's sort of that joy of discovery is still very much alive.
Now, that being said, though, eventually I think I would have run into a problem because I would have had to get one of those. The job.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
The
the job.
unfortunate
So
job.
then it might have become a different situation. But by the time I had jobs, I was already writing and able to fool myself into the idea that writing would become the full-time job. So it just seemed like this thing of, okay, you can will this to happen, but in reality, I had no understanding of the publishing industry. I mean, you mentioned submitting to agents. I never did. So
Because you won the contest, and that was what got you published.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of the
Which is Steve
the hard
Hamilton's
work
story,
you
too.
Yeah, exactly. Steve is another Michigan guy. You're a Michigan guy, right? Yeah. You prize-winning Michigan guys.
So the first book comes out, and then do you go back to the one that is now a prequel, or do you start fresh from there?
No one wanted me to go back to that. To this day. No, so I started fresh, and I wrote the third Lincoln Perry novel, and that was under contract. So they'd already given me money, and it was great. And I was 20 at that point.
And it was a fortune.
It's a
It
fortune.
certainly seemed like a fortune.
I was
I'm
in
sure.
a college apartment. I was 20 years old, so I was John Grisham. Yeah. I just didn't choose to fly private.
Right.
That was the only difference. And so I
Because you're a
sent
man
in
of the people.
A man of the people,
Yeah.
exactly. So I sent in this book that they had paid me the money to write, and they were like, "Oh, this is not good. This isn't the sort of thing that one would publish for an audience of people
Who know how to read.
And I thought, but you paid me to write it, so I thought we all agreed that I could write for an audience. And so there was some confusion over that. And my response was not to suggest any way to fix the book, rewrite it. It's just like, oh, I'll write another one, and then I did. So I wrote 4 Lincoln Perrys to get 2 published. Yes.
Okay.
You don't think this is a sound strategy?
No, I you got to do what you got to do. I guess I wish I could have written anything that quickly.
See, it really wasn't that quick, though. You've read King's book on writing.
Yes.
How many of you?
Stephen King's book,
yes,
yeah.
if you haven't, go on. Excellent. I assign you all to read this book. It's if you write 3 pages a day, you're going to have a novel by the end of the year. 3 pages, and you write 1 page a day, you'll end up with over 300 pages. So that part never intimidated me. Just like the idea that I would be able to get a book out there seemed reasonable. The idea that it would be a good book seemed much more challenging.
Right.
But since I was the only one reading it, it's like, who really cares? And I'll try it. And then you're learning to, I think feel free to disagree with me, but I think every writer learns, your first book, you're mimicking someone. Or you're mimicking many people, but the idea of a writing voice is so much more, these are the books that I like, and I can kind of understand the way that they were put together, on a plot level and sentence level. And then by book 4, book 5, you realize your own obsessions, interests, and you're seeing, and now reviewers have told you your flaws, so you're trying to, desperately to overcompensate for those. And suddenly, you become your own thing. But I don't think many people, there are exceptions, but I don't think many people arrive with a debut that is really their voice.
Or it's not really their debut, right?
Well,
So it's
yes.
their,
Exactly.
it's their 12th book, right? That this is just their public debut. So one of the things that there's a character in If She Wakes that is related to some characters from Those Who Wish Me Dead, and I thought that was a fun little kind of way to kind of relate, to sort of build this world. Is this something you've been doing all along that I just haven't been seeing, or is this your first?
No, I don't know what it says about me, but the brothers in Those Who Wish Me Dead, the sociopath killers, I really miss them, and there wasn't a way to bring them back that I saw. I actually considered it a prequel because I missed the exchange, like the interplay that they had.
Yeah.
And so I was in Dax Blackwell. So Jack has a son who's not referenced in Those Who Wish Me Dead, but is a main character in this book. He was the 3rd or 4th character that I had for this book, and I thought it might be a terrible idea because I knew I couldn't pair him with anyone that felt like, you know, the Jack and Patrick thing, and it's a repetitive gimmick. And I really like the idea of, you imagine being the son of or daughter of anyone who is truly elite. Like, imagine being Serena Williams' daughter and being handed a tennis racket. That's a unique kind of pressure, and some flee from it, some embrace it. And so I thought, okay, well, if I had the kid of, you know, the son of the LeBron James of Hitman, what would that look like?
What's the
And
psychology
so,
then?
yeah, I decided I was going to trot him out for one chapter, like an audition, and then I would sit back and yell cut if it wasn't working, but he worked.
Well,
to me, he worked.
Well, no, I think he's one of the, well, I like all your characters, but he is he's compelling in a very different way than the two women who really propel the book. But he's a very chatty assassin. I mean, he creates,
That's the family.
he creates that sort of pairing with kind of everybody he's with. Was that an intentional choice on your part, or is that just how he sort of showed up?
No, that's definitely a choice, because if I was going to honor the characters from Those Who Wish Me Dead at all, then I thought he had to, you know, there had to be some sort of lineage. Otherwise, you know, there wasn't really a point.
Right.
So in Those Who Wish Me Dead, what I really enjoyed about writing the brothers was their banter, and to me, they were far more chilling because they never seemed rushed, and they always seemed mildly amused, and I think that created a sense of control that, you know, ratcheted up the fear. And so I wanted to see if I handed it off to the kid, if he could, you know, pick that up and carry it. And then I really became sort of intrigued with the idea of someone who looks so, you know, boyish and harmless, who actually is so dangerous, and
Just like yourself.
just exactly, just like that. I just thought he had different access. You know, people would not look up in the same way. But then you have it's also I don't think it's stretching credibility to say, you know, you could have a 17-year-old sociopath who would study his craft, because on a serious note, like we've met Eric Harris, and you know, I don't if you've read Columbine, Dave Cullen's book on that, the amount of time that Harris was spending on, you know, researching the art of killing was 16, 17 years old, and he's floating through that school, but he has this whole other idea, and so I wanted to bring that into, you know, Dax Blackwell. It's the idea that he could be a very serious sort of master of his craft at a very young age,
and still charming. I mean, in a sort of creepy way, but still very charming and valuable. And yeah, he's a great character.
Thank you.
So you did say something about write into a scene and say cut. So that's my entree into some news that you have, which you folks may or may not have heard.
Yeah, I think I've been here. This is been here 13 years in a row talking about movies that might be made. They're actually making the mistake of making one right now. I didn't think they would get around to that, but yeah, they're filming Those Who Wish Me Dead in New Mexico.
It's filming now?
They're shooting right now.
Right on.
Angelina Jolie is out there doing her thing. So yeah, it's surreal. I worked on the book for 2 years. I worked on the script for over a year, and then there were, you know, periods of the dormant stretches of development in between. So the idea that it's actually in motion and filming is kind of jarring. I kept expecting it would be kicked down the road by 3 months, because that's usually the rule. It's always, you know, 3 months we'll get this into development. But unless something is going terribly wrong right now, they are actually making the movie. Yes.
And so you wrote the screenplay.
I wrote one of the screenplays. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So Taylor Sheridan, who's the director,
He would want to write his own screenplay version or something.
Yeah, he was. I cannot say he was in any way overly aggressive with it, but he also wasn't adapting the novel. He was adapting my script at that point. He came on, when there was a script, and I also think he's an incredibly talented screenwriter. So he wrote Hell or High Water, the Sicario movies,
Wind
River. He wrote and directed, which is excellent. And yeah, his writing decisions, I think, are excellent. It's a unique director material pairing because he actually knows the West, like he knows Montana and Wyoming. He lives in Wyoming, so that's rare. And I wanted, not that it mattered what I wanted, but ideally you would have someone who gets the sense of the setting as a character, and I think they managed to get it to the one director in LA right now who I really see that in all of his work. It's like, okay, this is it's a priority for him.
Well, and so these are grown-ups making this, right? This is not some weird offshoot, right? This is Taylor Sheridan and Angelina Jolie. This is like a real film.
We have Aidan Gillen for you Game of Thrones fans, or The Wire, anyone? Kirkcaldy. And Nicholas Hoult, who you can go all the way back to, he was the kid in About a Boy, and then he became Beast in X-Men. So he's grown up, so nice. Tyler Perry, they managed to put an amazing cast together. So if it goes badly, it will be my fault.
Of course.
Just haven't decided how.
No, you're the writer. That's right. So, any questions we got at this point here?
Well, I guess it would be to the movie. How much actual voice did you have on kind of all
at
aspects?
this stage? They would rather I not have a voice at all. If I could go into locked-in syndrome, that's where they want me. But I did. At one point I was writing the script, so I had. During the first draft of that, it was like writing the book. It was my chance to reimagine it completely, and then throughout the process, and you're getting producer notes and executive notes, and it begins to be more shaped, and then it dies, and then Taylor Sheridan comes in and says, "I think I can fix this," and then it comes back to life. But if you're asking, did they consult me before casting? No.
They didn't say Angelina Jolie thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yeah, exactly. What do you think of her? No, never. That call somehow never came in, but I think it's actually when you begin to get closer, I felt like everyone was becoming more nervous about any sort of leaked news because one thing goes wrong and the whole movie unravels. And I had one producer in particular who I think is just, he shares my pessimism about anything being made, so that was somewhat reassuring. We both thought it was not going to happen. It's good to work with someone like that.
Well, that's the nature of Hollywood. Is so much stuff gets made. There are screenwriters who have had a long and lucrative career writing scripts that get bought that never get made. It's sort of it's the ecosystem. So it's great to see that it's.
I've written 5 of those scripts now. I guess technically this one will be it will be made, but and I'm thinking of book 10 of the 14 books were under option at some point, and to finally get one through. Now I feel like, after having that experience, it just seems kind of amazing to me that anything ever gets through.
Yeah.
Particularly as a feature right now. TV is, the market is so wide open. it's like a new streaming network is looking for original content. It seems like, quarterly there's a new player in the game there. Theatrical features, that is narrowed so much in the last few years.
We'll know if the first word isn't the Avengers something, right, or Star Wars. I mean, it's sort of sequel land because
I didn't mention it's the Avengers Wish Me Dead.
Oh, that's good. That's good. It's actually a catchy title.
It's not bad. I'll pitch that.
Yeah. Patrick, had a question?
I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the locked-in syndrome, because it's such a fascinating idea. And did you actually give them just the basic setup without there's a lot of spoilers we can't get into with the book, obviously, but can you give just the basic setup of the book?
In terms of the actual plot.
Just sort of what gets
The elevator pitch. I'm helpless. What is the book about?
Here, do you want me to read the back?
Yeah, exactly. So, Tara, the character who has locked-in syndrome, who's in the coma, has been basically a chaperone to get a university speaker from a dinner to his talk. And then there's a car accident that's not a car accident, and he's killed, and she is the lone surviving witness, but she also doesn't really know what she saw. It was just, everything was off, and I liked the idea that she would be the key to the lock in terms of the way she functions within the plot. But then, as I got farther along with it, I became more intrigued with the idea that she shouldn't know anything that's very clear, because when eventually, the reader understands, they're going to figure out that Tara is actually alert. And then if she can, blink out her crucial message, you're kind of dead then.
Right. Well, that's also
from
a
the plot
little too on the nose, right?
It's a little too on the nose, exactly. So Tara ends up knowing probably the least of any of the characters about the stakes, and she's always a little bit behind. And to get back to your question, one of the things that really fascinated me about locked-in syndrome when I was doing my research was people who have survived and emerged from it and had a full recovery. They are particularly bothered by the lack of communication coming in from the medical world around them, because people think they treat them not like a piece of furniture, but it's that idea of talking around. You don't need to address someone directly. And I read one memoir from this woman from the UK, I can't think of the title, but she talked about how something as seemingly small as giving a name, or what a doctor did, would have been hugely reassuring. And instead they're going about their business and feeling no need to offer that.
They talk to the family and not to her.
Exactly, and a lot of times that will happen out of the room. So that was one element of the research that I thought, okay, emotionally, you're always looking for that thing of what can I anchor in emotionally that's going to bring the audience along so they actually feel this experience. And the sense of an absence of knowledge seemed more crucial to me than anything. It would have been, I think it would have been kind of smashed by the fact that she's aware of some great secret. She knows that this guy was killed intentionally. She doesn't even know that. And by removing all of that from her, it allowed me to focus more on her actual condition and circumstances, to what I think is the benefit. You might disagree and say that was a terrible choice.
Terrible choice. Yes.
I was asking you in the back about, have you guys all read that wonderful, I think probably the best anti-war novel, at least one of them, Dalton Trumbo's book, Johnny Get Your Gun, something called
Yeah.
Johnny Get Your Gun. And you said you had read it. Was that an influence at all, or not really? I mean, it's a slightly different scenario, but it's...
Certainly not directly, but
Yeah.
after you asked me about it, I think, sure, because it all goes into everything you read is kind of in the subconscious stir, right? And
There's another great book, you may have read it, Walter Mosley's, what's it called, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. It was just this idea of this guy who was I think he was in his 90s, and he was suffering from dementia. And, he was just had that constant frustration that the information that he was looking for was there, he could only access it, deep within. I mean, it's kind of I love books like that very emotional kind of frustration of, he makes the deal kind of a Faustian bargain, where, okay, you'll have this experimental medical thing. You can live for 6 more months, I think it is, and have complete, recall, but then you die, and what kind of bargain is that?
Well, there's I can't remember is it Charlie? There's a great,
Yes.
is that
Flowers for Algernon?
there you go, that's
Flowers for
that's a flower shirt that has that same sort of, well, I going back to this idea of sort of all the stuff that swirls around in your head, that there's a great Cormac McCarthy quote, books are made of other books.
Oh, 100%.
That it's all the stuff that you read, and then sometimes it's embarrassing to see the places you stole something from without knowing that you were stealing directly. But I always prefer to steal directly, so at least I can do it in a way that I can sort of hide my tracks a little bit. But then something comes out and it's like,
It's good to at least be aware of it, but the truth is, you're not. We call on all of these other narratives, and when you're in the midst of creating one, you probably aren't thinking about the dozens of books or movies that have gone into the influence of it. I would say I much prefer writers who offer direct acknowledgement to their influences, though, and it seems to be kind of a weird phobia in our business to an extent. Like we'll say who we like, but not this book made me want to write this book. So one that I've talked about in here before is reading A Young Man on Fire by Norman MacLean is the reason I wrote Those Who Wish Me Dead. It is that simple. It tracks that way. And songwriters are, for the most part, always very honest about it. Like, okay, so, this riff came from this Nirvana song, which came from this Muddy Waters. And I feel like writers don't want to be that honest about it. It's, oh yeah, I love Cormac. I've read some of his stuff, but my post-apocalyptic story of a father and son is totally different. We always want to feel like the creator, the originator of it, but I actually think it's much more, it's more honest, but it's also a better dialogue for readers if everyone is direct about, the books that moved them enough to want to write something similar.
well, and hopefully then you can direct the reader to some of these other books, right? I think part of the pleasure is to talk about the things that you have loved and to sort of share them with other people, right?
Yeah, but I've only loved my books.
You should be going like this.
Well, Nick, can you tell us a little bit about your next book that's coming out?
Sure. I have a book coming out in January called The Wild One, in which my protagonist goes to Iceland to track down the missing. This is my first elevator pitch. To track down the missing grandson of a woman, and her daughter's been killed by the son-in-law, and so the son-in-law has absconded with the child to Iceland. And so Peter, it was kind of a mess in this book. This is kind of a relapse book because he was getting too comfortable in the last one. So,
and you did some travel to Iceland.
I did.
Recently.
I've been twice. My son Duncan is kind of my adventure travel companion, and he's wanted to go to Iceland forever. And 2 summers ago, we went and did this astonishing hike where at the Hornstrandir Nature Reserve, they take you in a boat with. We were there the day that the park opened, and we were going with. There was a boat full of people who were doing a little kayaking in the fjord and some little day hikes, and but we were going in the same day as the ranger, and so they they take you in this boat that can hold 20 people and 6 kayaks, and then they put you in the little orange dinghy, and they zip you up onto the beach. Right? There's no dock. There's no, and then you get out with your backpack, and the guy with the dinghy says, "We'll see you at the next fjord in 5 days." and the ranger says, "See ya," and he takes off because he's he lives and breathes this stuff, and I'm slightly older than he certainly was, and we just there's really not a path. There are these cairns that you follow because there's grass, but it's also mostly rock and snow, and so we just kind of went, and it was the most sublime, transcendent experience in recent years. And I'm not someone who I don't outline books as I go. I start at the beginning and I write through. And this was the first book that in the airport on the way home, we were waiting to get on the plane, and this book sort of came to me all in a piece. And I frantically scribbled in my tiny little journal for 15 minutes, trying to capture what I could from it. So that's what this book is.
Your talk about the setting makes me remember a fun bit of advice that Lee Child gave me very early on. So my first 3 books were set in Cleveland, and I met Lee at I think it was BoucherCon in Toronto, and maybe my second book had come out. And I mean, Lee, he's the most generous guy on the planet, so he's giving me time and treating me as if I'm a peer and not a fanboy. And we're walking down the sidewalk, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he says, "So if you travel to research your book, that's tax deductible." And I'm like, "Yeah, Lee, I'm young and I'm from Indiana, but I'm not a complete rube. I know that." So I say whatever I tell him, it's like, not my hackles really up, but just defensive enough. Like, trust me, I understand that. Not missing out on that. And he takes another puff of his cigarette and he goes, "And still you choose Cleveland?" Hearing you talk about Iceland, I'm like, okay, this is somebody who gets it. That's very.
Well, there's I can't remember who it is. There's an English writer who famously deducted a hot tub, and he was sued by whatever the English income tax organization would be, and he won because it's in a book.
I want you to try that first.
Well, I shouldn't really say anything because we're on Facebook Live, but
Hi, IRS, right?
I am a believer in business travel, and you never really know where. I mean, I've taken trips from years back where they show up.
Possibly you had an idea.
Well, sure, and they show up eventually.
Right, you don't know yet.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question for both you guys. I'm really interested in talking to writers about how their work outside of writing kind of informs their work. It seems to me that Nick, with Home Inspector, what a great job. I mean, you have entry into all these various people's lives in a very personal thing, going into their homes. And has that had an impact upon your work in any way?
It had a huge impact on my work. Well, first, being my first kind of real job out of college was as a roofer's helper, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. The first thing that the real roofers do is they set the ladders and then they climb up to the ridge and then they smoke a joint. That's how roofing is done. And my job was to, and I was terrified of heights, but my job was to basically carry the shingles up the roof and help tear stuff down. I wasn't actually allowed to attach any shingles, but as a
could you carry the nail gun?
This was pre-nail gun days. These were all hand nails. Yes, this was.
Did you carry the joint?
Not on the job. That scared the crap out of me. The idea that you would smoke pot first thing in the morning and then climb around on a roof. And these guys.
But you said you were scared of heights. Maybe it would have been
Maybe
normal
so.
heights.
These were guys who didn't always use the ladder though. Like they would just jump off the roof occasionally. It was really. It was so like. It was an education into a world that I had not otherwise had any access. So I grew up in a nice middle-class home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and everybody in my family had gone to college, and that was the expectation. And you know, my dad worked for was a management consultant. My mom worked for the art museum, and I, you know, had long hair and a big beard, and I was a roofer's helper, and it was a different planet. But I also fell into this world that I really learned to love, and I became a carpenter and a cabinet maker and a furniture builder, and I ran a remodeling company, and that's a very intimate view of people's lives, because you're taking their house apart and you're in their life for 3 months or 6 months, and you see them in their bathrobes, and you see them, you know, freaked out and terrified and
Do you
pissed
judge
off.
them in the way that I always feel judged?
Yes. But the home inspector bit was so I am an introvert impersonating an extrovert, and being a home inspector taught me how to impersonate an extrovert, because I met 2 or 3 different groups of people every day, and I had to sort of impress upon them my knowledge and expertise, kind of like I'm attempting to do now. And I also it was an excuse to research and to dive into this thing that I was interested in. But buying a house is a very emotional moment, especially buying your first house. And I have always been somebody that people say weird things to, like people tell me secrets in line at the grocery store. I don't, it's my face or what, I don't know. But to spend 3 hours walking around somebody's first house. And the things that they tell me about their parents, about their work, about, you know, I don't know if this marriage is going to last, but we had to buy the house because of her income. I mean, it was just this whole, like,
You should work in a bookstore.
people tell you stuff too?
He's not going to admit it with all of us here.
But it provide, yeah, and it was a constant refreshing of that.
Perspective changer.
Yeah. And I learned to be able to talk in front of people, which was the other thing that I never thought was something that was required to be an author, because I had always just, you know, on my laptop.
Michael, tell us about your PI work. How did you get into that? And what kind of stuff did you do?
I got into it, as I mentioned earlier, through an independent study program in high school, and then it turned into a part-time job, and eventually it was my only day job until So Cold the River came out, and I was able to write full-time. But it actually was, I was in just the right sized market. Our town was big enough that you kind of covered like a region, not just a town, but it was large enough that you would see a wide variety of cases, but not so big that you had to kind of be like niche focused. So, I mean, I worked everything from really ridiculous, you know, property disputes, to accident investigations, to wrongful death investigations. I worked on a death penalty defense case successfully for the Innocence Project. So it was just, when you talk about being a crime writer, it was grist for the mill on a level that I can't imagine any other job matching. Other than being a reporter is also, you know, that's, you're forced to meet different people and just kind of understand a different language and different, be able to communicate with people in a setting that makes them comfortable. And to do that every day is just, I mean, that's an exercise in writing a character. So yeah, it was great. The war stories were much more interesting on the PI side, but the reporter work probably paid off more in terms of the writing, I think.
What kind of beat did you work as a reporter?
I did everything at some point. I did everything from sports to police beat to environmental issues. It was back when we had it was this amazing time when there were newspapers and they had newsrooms and staff. And
Is this in Bloomington?
yeah, yeah. And I say that jokingly, but actually it's a real concern to me now because the newspaper that I worked at, my hometown paper, was recently bought out by one of the national hedge fund back chains, and I mean we're seeing that happen everywhere. And then they cut the staff down to the bone, and what a community gets out of a good newspaper versus what a community loses and might not even really know is gone is a serious concern for me. So I feel like an old timer in the news industry because I worked in this era when they were still making money. No one was scared of the internet really being a threat yet, or let alone social media. And we didn't even have comments on the online articles. It was wonderful. There was no snark. It was like an actual print newspaper and I left at just the right time, and that was something. That's my cheerful talk about news. That's why you should stay in fiction.
Any other thoughts out there?
Have you started on your next project yet?
My editor? No. Okay. I'm working on it. Yes. Actually, yes. I should be rewriting right now, and we were talking about this before coming over here. The fun of being in the midst of a rewrite always seems to fall when you're on tour, and writing in hotel rooms and on planes is kind of difficult for me. I can throw ideas out, but I can't actually sink into the book in the ways I want. So I'll have something out next year. It will be, I want to layer it with as much mystery as possible. Have I done that? It will be different. It will be very different. And then I'm working on something that will be a little more my standard fare that will come out in 2021. What year is it? 2021, yes.
What can you say about claustrophobia? I read your piece.
Oh, see,
Great little piece.
you read the the list, yeah. So I was thinking, I did this list of claustrophobic reads, and some of my personal favorites. I really like Joyce Carol Oates' Blackwater. I would recommend that one. Slade House. I mean, I had a bunch in there, but claustrophobia is something that I write about continuously, and it's like the one phobia I don't yet have. Although
Even after the campaign?
I was gonna say now it's gonna come for me, but I think what inspired If She Wakes in a sense was the idea of being in a coma, unable to communicate or even let people know that you're in there is the ultimate in claustrophobic terror to me. It's the being buried alive sensation.
But there's something very writerly about that particular manifestation of that phobia, right? Because it's the communication, right? That's what we do for a living, and it's part of what defines who we are and how we are, right? So if you're, to me, if I was buried alive, eventually I'd be dead.
Eventually,
you know,
yes.
but like if you were locked in, you could live like that for a terrifyingly long time.
And people are, yes. That's it's good cheerful stuff. It's,
Or just solitary confinement for long
Right, which is also very much happening. Yeah. Right,
Any
so
other questions, or do you want me to leave you on that cheerful idea of?
how about a joke? Does anybody got
Right.
a joke?
All right, so comas it is. All right.
All right. We'll leave
Thank
it
you,
with
guys.
that. Thanks for coming out.
Warm welcome for Nick for coming in and hosting tonight's event. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody on Facebook. Thanks for you guys for coming out tonight, as always. And if you wouldn't mind just kind of folding up your chair and putting it against the closest wall, these guys will be